Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents An Alien Appeal by Tom Mccaffrey, narrated by Joe Barrett. Chapter 1. The Ties That Bind. I thought it would be easier. After all, she was my sister. I guess it was the guilt which now came flooding back through my veins and caused the flush to rise above my collar line. My selfish conduct had led to the deaths of our three brothers. I stood staring across the bobbing heads in the crowd of other arriving passengers, effortlessly connecting with their loved ones at the gate, but I could not bring myself to do anything to catch the attention of the two women holding the hand-drafted sign on a rainbow background that read, "Brother, don't know his name. He's a Yank in the WPP." I placed my suitcase on the floor and let the other passengers from other flights roll past me like I was a protruding stone in the middle of a gently flowing stream, and watched as the two women nervously scanned the advancing waves of faces for that spark of recognition as their eyes made momentary contact. 30 years is a long time. When I last saw Bonnie, we both had matching, thick, dark brown hair. The two petite women holding the sign were blondes, with streaks of gray highlights. I was bald. Not that chrome dome with a fringe of fine hair around the periphery, or the desperate comb-over. Once I realized that my hairline had retreated too far from my eyebrows to see both at the same time in the car rearview mirror, I made the conscious decision to shave it completely. The first few times required a lot of styptic and toilet paper, but after a while I got it down to where I could shave my head faster than my face. You see, gravity favors the dome, not the jowls, so my head could be completed smoothly with one hand. The face, which required manual manipulations to work around, required two. My sister's spouse, Tessa, gave up her watch and began to whisper nervously in her companion's ear, while Bonnie gave the replenishing crowd one last sweep, just as a gap in the human herd opened around me. She stared long and hard in my direction, finally locking eyes with my pair of matching blue, and then she smiled. "Brava!" she shouted with a polished accent of the BBC newscaster. I grabbed my bag and used my best New York crowd-dancing moves to slip through the masses that were coagulating at the gate. Bonnie, on the other hand, left Tessa holding the sign and carved a straight groove through the crowd on her end. I quickly learned that the years had not diminished Bonnie's strength when she embraced me in a bear hug that took my breath away and lifted me to my toes. I held my suitcase over her head, which was buried in my chest, until she finally released me. "Where's your hair?" she said, as she took a step back and gave me the once-over. "I left it with my other hat," I replied, drawing that delightful laugh I had not heard in ages. Her blue eyes sparkled. Tessa arrived, and Bonnie quickly introduced her. "Jimmy, it's still Jimmy, right?" I nodded, and she continued. "Jimmy, this is Tessa DeMille," Bonnie said, giving Tessa access to the space she had just occupied. T effortlessly pulled me down to her height and planted the double European kiss on my cheeks. Before I could say "nice to meet you," she wrenched my suitcase from my hand, and with a firm "follow me," led us through the rest of the airport to a waiting black cab just outside of the arrival area. As we followed, Bonnie grasped my hand for dear life. We did not speak, but kept stealing glances at each other as we walked along. We were instantly transported back in time to the front of the family pram in Maccombs Park by Yankee Stadium in the Bronx. I laughed as I thought about how she still had the strongest grip in the family. My dad certainly would be proud. The ladies sat together on the back bench of the cab, and I sat facing them on the kind of fold-up jump seat that I had not seen since the last of the checker cabs left New York in 1999. T called out an address on Regents Park Road, Primrose Hill, and the cabbie nodded and merged seamlessly into the traffic flowing out towards the airport exit. I recoiled briefly until I remembered that we were supposed to be driving on the wrong side of the road. "You're taller than I expected," T said, her deep brown eyes studying me for some conversational opening. "He was the runt of the litter," Bonnie chimed in, "at least among the boys." I laughed. At 5'10", I was the smallest of the male pack, who all were over 6 feet tall by their teens. Growing up, that disadvantage forced me to rely more on my wits than stature for survival. The irony was that I was now, by default, the tallest and last man standing. "You don't talk much," T continued. She turned to Bonnie. "You told me he was the chatterbox." "I'm sorry," I responded. "It's T, right? Just a bit jet-lagged." "Bonnie says you were some kind of mafia lawyer," T countered, deadpan. "Wait, what?" I stammered. "T, that was not for public dissemination," Bonnie responded sharply. "And anyway, that's all in the past. Isn't it, Jimmy?" I quickly turned to check on the cabbie, who seemed to be distracted listening to the cricket scores on the radio and oblivious to our conversation. I leaned forward and stage-whispered, "I was a government witness in a federal criminal matter." I could feel my face flushing. "But that's all behind me now." "Oh, yes. And what do you do now?" T said, undeterred. "He's a day trader," Bonnie said. Then, changing gears as she saw my rising discomfort, "How's Gina? It is Gina, isn't it?" "Yes, Gina," I said, my eyes still engaged with T's. "She's doing great. Sends her love." I thought about how Gina told me before I left not to worry about calling her, that she would be busy with her projects around the property, and I did not want to be chatting at weird hours given the time differences. I waited another long moment before adding a placating, "To both of you." T smiled at that. These simple questions kept reminding me how much we had missed in each other's lives. "Bonnie, are you still the headmistress of that posh school?" I asked my sister, seizing control of the conversation before T got to follow up with another question. "Oh, no, we've been retired for years," T answered, tenaciously engaged. "Yes, T and I packed it in about 5 years ago," Bonnie said, reaching over and squeezing T's hand. "Spend most of our time at home in Salisbury," T continued, "but we still keep our place in Primrose Hill. We come in for short stretches for a little culture booster." As I listened to T speak, I tried to get a fix on her accent. It had the same patina of BBC newscaster that Bonnie shared, but there was a tiny plumy lilt. I was about to mention it when the cab pulled up in front of a stretch of creamy Victorian row houses with white trim, and the Cockney cabbie called out, "Home sweet home, ladies and gent." The cabbie retrieved my bag from the boot of the cab and settled his fare with T, who waved me off when I offered to pay. There was a stone wall with a wrought iron gate segregating their home from their neighbors, and their front yard consisted of a meticulous small green garden on either side of the short path leading up to their front steps. The buildings along their block looked only 40 feet wide and were each uniformly 3 stories high. Some had French doors opening onto small balconies with overhanging gardens on the upper floors, and I could see that the rooftops also served as outdoor living spaces. Across the winding street was a lush green park with rolling hills and flagstone paths littered with old-fashioned benches, the kind that Central Park once proudly displayed before New York fell. "Remember when Spaghetti dragged that bench home from Central Park?" Bonnie reminisced from somewhere beside me. I laughed at the memory of my grandfather, who returned from his job as an Upper East Side doorman one night, dragging the cast-iron sections of a Central Park bench. It had been replaced on its spot on Fifth Avenue by a more modern version to keep the local Brahmins happy. The workers were a couple of micks from back home that were more than happy to shift the burden of disposal of the original bench to one of their countrymen. Each section was at least 50 pounds. Spaghetti was built like and had the strength of a lowland gorilla, so he was more than willing to take it off their hands. We were all playing tag in our backyard in Riverdale when we spotted him carrying the pieces, 2 in his right hand, 1 in his left, up our driveway. He had carried them across the park to the Upper West Side and brought them with him north to the Bronx on the No. 1 subway line. He walked the remaining mile from the subway to our house. In 2 days, he replaced the missing wooden slats, and it looked as good as anything I was now staring at in Regent's Park. That bench gave me my first set of 6 stitches shortly afterwards, when my brother, the ginger, tripped me as I ran past him, my right eyebrow making solid contact with one of those large iron circles at the end of that bench. Nothing comes free, and New York City always draws its blood sacrifice. My father, as always, did a great job on the stitches. The scar is barely noticeable to this day. He still feels bad about that, Bonnie said. Oh, bad about what? I asked, startled back to the present. Oh, Ginger, Bonnie said. Come on, let's get you inside and squared away with some breakfast and a kip. She smiled. That's a nap to you Yanks. She turned and headed through the gate and up the stairs of the corner row house, where T stood patiently waiting with my suitcase. I took one last look at the benches and turned and followed her inside, briefly wondering about the synchronicity of that last comment. If I had not been jaded by the most amazing year of my life, where life, death, the supernatural, and extraterrestrial all merged together, I probably would have given it more thought. As it was, I was feeling jet-lagged from the overnight flight, so I shifted my focus to the possibility of some breakfast and a nap as I followed them up the front stairs, before venturing any deeper into my family re-engagement. Chapter 2. Tea and Synchronicity. Where the exterior of the row house transported you to the era of Dickens, Bronte, and Hardy, the interior of their row home was modern and sleek, with 3 floors of front-to-rear open floor plans, soft lighting, earth-tone pastels on flawless walls and ceilings, and built-in storage spaces. It had dark oak flooring throughout, and unpretentious but expensive antique furniture. The kitchen was on the main floor and was large and open, with a long center island, and lined with stainless steel appliances bearing names like La Cornue, Sub-Zero, Wolf, Mila, and Fisher. There were 3 bedrooms on the top floor. The master faced the front and had its own large terrace overlooking Regent's Park. There was a large 4-post mahogany king-size bed, with a matching mahogany secretary's desk off to one side, a walk-in closet filled with clothing from the shops of New Bond Street in London, and their ensuite had a floor-to-ceiling slate walk-in glass shower with a bench and 6 shower heads lining the wall. A 40-inch rainfall shower head above opened on the side of the common wall of their neighbor. The clawfoot porcelain soaking tub by the back window was large enough for my mule Claire to bathe in. In New York money, this house had experienced a $10 million renovation. T had placed my bag in one of the 2 matching guest bedrooms facing the rear of the building. Both opened up through sliding glass doors onto a single terrace that ran the width of the building and overlooked other similar terraces and gardens on the less expensive blocks extending away from Regent's Park. There was a small iron stairway that led to the roof on the end of the terrace. The only difference between my bedroom and its twin was that mine had windows that opened out onto the quaint curving side street that led away from the park. Bonnie circled the room, drawing the thick blackout curtains before retreating to the bedroom doorway. "Get some sleep, and then we can catch up properly over brunch," she said, as she gently closed the heavy oak door to the bedroom. I leaped on the full bed in the corner, fully clothed, and was asleep before the echo of the door catch had dissipated. I immediately entered REM sleep, which I had not experienced since I left New York as a dues-paying member of the federal government's Witness Protection Program. But it was restless and troubling, as my mind was filled with a series of zeros and ones that kept replicating in a repeated pattern. I could not force myself awake, and the numbers began to emit a corresponding sound, and the next thing I knew, I was repeating the numbers while keeping time with the sound. It became comfortable as my mind gained control over the content. I did not know what these numbers meant, but it felt eerily familiar. The pattern was finally broken by an external sound of gentle but repeated rapping of knuckles on solid wood, and I finally relinquished my sleep as the door of the bedroom cracked open, and T poked her head through and said, "Brunch and 10 love downstairs in the back garden." I rubbed the sleep from my eyes and nodded as she shut the door. The clock on the night table said 12 noon, which meant I had been sleeping for almost 3 hours. I stood and went to the small desk and retrieved a pen and some paper from the drawer. I wrote down the numbers with an astonishing full recollection. When I finished, I could not begin to fathom what the numbers meant, so I folded the paper and stuck it in the back pocket of my jeans, then quickly washed my face and brushed my teeth in my small bathroom before heading down to brunch. The bottom floor had a large, luxurious Persian carpet running along most of its central flooring, with an oversized matching sofa, love seat, and 2 reclining chairs along its perimeter. There was a 98-inch QLED 8K flat screen on the common wall and high-end PMC speakers dotting the 4 corners of the large open room. There was another guest bathroom tucked ergonomically under the stairway. The back wall was completely made of thick glass, which filled the room with natural light and opened up through the sliding glass doors onto a small ivy-covered walled-in garden. The high green-thatched walls provided a strong feeling of solitude and privacy. A capacious, ornate alabaster fountain against the far stone wall streamed clear, bubbling water from the mouth of the gargoyle, situated at its peak, into a large semicircled pool embedded in the moss-covered earth below. The soft, gurgling sound was comforting and inviting. It reminded me of the sound that accompanied the numbers in my dream. I was distracted by what appeared to be a hummingbird as it darted quickly up from the water's edge and over the back wall. In the small center patio sat my sister, engaged with her iPhone. 2 fine china settings bookended a 3-tiered sterling silver Lazy Susan at the center of the table, laden with rich-looking pastries. A matching sterling silver coffee pot, steam rising from its spout, completed the ensemble. Bonnie looked up from her cell phone as I slid open the plate glass door and smiled, pushing her thick glasses up the bridge of her nose as she stood to greet me. "How was your kip?" she inquired, stretching up and kissing me softly on my cheek. "Oh," she said, rubbing her fingers along my stubble, "someone needs a shave." I returned the peck and followed her gesture to my place at the table. "Sorry about that," I replied, rubbing my face with my palm. T made it seem like there wasn't time for a shower and shave. I ran my hand over my face and head, feeling the stubble. I was surprised to sense some roughness towards the front of my dome, which had been relatively smooth between shaves for decades. Bonnie smiled and rolled her eyes. "Life with T, like the trains of yore, runs on an extremely strict and tight schedule. No excuses." "Where is she?" I asked. "She's playing a round of golf with some friends at Highgate. She'll catch up with us tonight at the house in Salisbury." She slowly spun the Lazy Susan to give me a closer view of the delightful pastries. I snatched one of the butter-glazed scones and tore it open on my plate. "Butter?" I asked, scanning the table. "Try the Cornish clotted cream," Bonnie said, sliding over a small bowl of a thick, cream-colored, almost meringue consistency. "T makes it herself fresh every morning." I scooped some out of the bowl with my knife, slathered it on my scone, and took a large bite. It was delicious. Another first for me. "It's really a shame you don't have it back in the States," Bonnie added. "Really? Why not?" I responded before stuffing the rest of the delicious scone into my mouth and reaching for the coffee. "It's illegal to make it," Bonnie said with a twinkle in her eye. "It's unpasteurized." I did not even wait to add milk to my coffee cup before filling my mouth with its almost scalding liquid and swishing away any imagined microbes that could give me a dose of the European version of Montezuma's Revenge. Bonnie watched me with amusement. "Don't worry, it won't kill you," she said, slipping back into her Bronx accent. I was immediately transported back to when she fed me a dog biscuit when I was 5. "Come on," she continued. "You still haven't forgiven me for the milk bone." I paused my forceful, heated oral hygiene and swallowed my large mouthful of coffee while I quickly replayed her earlier comment about the ginger. I stared across the table, silently assessing this tiny woman with large Coke bottle glasses and an impish smile. Under normal circumstances, I would have immediately gone for my tin-foil hat, but I had just spent the last year somewhere over the rainbow, so I knew anything was possible, and I could recognize the real deal when I spotted it. "Thank you, Nonna Burke," Bonnie whispered, as she gazed upward, placing her hands together in supplication. I laughed out loud. "Fuck me," I said. "Is everybody in this world gifted but me?" "It's a female thing," Bonnie responded. "We can't all be perfect." Suddenly I was distracted by the blurred figure of the hummingbird circling around Bonnie's head. It was joined by another, and then they began to hover in formation. She seemed not to notice them. I kept trying to get a fix on their obscured, gyrating figures. "Those hummingbirds really like you," I said, pointing. They seemed to shift laterally away from any spot my index finger was directed at. "There are no wild hummingbirds in Europe," Bonnie replied. She held out her hand, and the three shapes all descended on her open palm. They landed as one, and there, standing before me, were three tiny, beautiful young female humanoid creatures dressed in diaphanous earth-tone clothes. Each had a set of silver gossamer wings, which extended from their shoulders to just below their hips, which they now gently folded behind them. Their golden hair mimicked glowing filaments that seemed to dance around their shoulders. I could see tiny points of flesh as the end of their ears peeked out the sides of their heads. They were enchanting. "These are my dear friends, the water sprites," Bonnie said as she passed her free hand over the creatures. "Anya, Brina, and Daenerys." She extended her hand forward, and they each curtsied seriatim. As they gazed up at me, each with whitish blue eyes, I could see tiny smiles forming around their mouths. One of them stepped forward and attempted to speak, but it sounded like the high-pitched chirps of a baby mouse. "No, Brina," Bonnie answered. "Jimmy doesn't speak, sprite." With a flourish, Bonnie flipped her palm skyward, and the three sprites each spun upwards into synchronized reverse backflips before morphing back into their gyrating blurs and heading as a group towards the fountain, chirping to each other as they went. Bonnie waved her hand to get my attention, which was totally on the sprites, and then gestured towards my plate and food. "Eat up, baby brother. We have lots to talk about and a 2-hour road trip ahead of us." Chapter 3. Ms. Magoo's Wild Ride. Having showered, shaved, and repacked my bag, I joined Bonnie downstairs in front of the row house, where she waited by the curb with one Rimowa carry-on suitcase. She was dressed in fitted brown slacks and a tweed jacket, with a beige cashmere scarf tied in that foppish way that my once-upon-a-time legal brethren, Robert Maloney, liked to wear his, with a large loop at the neck opening of his jacket. Even though I never gave the feds anything on Robert, I marveled at how he had avoided going down with the rest of the Valachi family, and Lenny had told me Robert had changed his practice from criminal to entertainment law. Personally, I did not see much of a difference between the two. I lifted the brown medianoche wide-brim fedora hat from her head and tried it on for size. Not even close. I gently returned it to its proper place. She ignored me while she stared down the hill. She had replaced her reading glasses with even larger, thicker driving glasses. When she finally looked up at me, she looked like a barn owl. "So what's the plan, sis? Another black cab ride?" We were distracted by 3 quick beeps from an approaching SUV, with another smaller sports car trailing behind it. They pulled up directly in front of us, and the driver in the first car hopped out and grabbed Bonnie's and my suitcases and slid them past the side-hinged tailgate into the back of the SUV. "The keys are in the console, miss," the driver said when he finished. "Thank you, Spencer," Bonnie called to the young man as he waved back and slid into the shotgun side of the second vehicle, which immediately headed off and disappeared around the corner with a roar. "Come on, then," she said with her traces of Bronx accent. She marched over to the open driver door and hoisted herself into the seat. What is it with tiny people and big cars, I thought to myself, as I watched her scramble up the high step, supporting her body weight on the interior armrest. I hesitated for a moment to get my bearings before sliding into the shotgun seat where the driver's seat should be. I did not even get my seatbelt fastened before Bonnie called out, "Hang on!" and took off around the corner. It turned out that Bonnie's SUV was a 2020 Land Rover Defender X and looked ready to take on an Arctic expedition, never mind a trip to the country. It was metallic silver with gloss black detailing to the hood, tailgate script and front grille, and a Narvik black hood checker plate. It had 22-inch 5-spoke wheels that could just about drive over anything. "Who was the kid back there?" I queried. "That's Spencer. He was a student in my school. He's on gap year, so he looks after our property for us. We keep our cars in a private lot a few blocks away. He shuttles them back and forth when we need them. We let him use them as needs be. He maintains them lovingly." I wondered what their other cars were like. "I adore this car," Bonnie called out as she accelerated and intently followed the directions of the lovely British voice coming from her GPS, winding her way through the side streets of this beautiful section of London. I watched as her legs worked the gas pedal and brake alternatively but in tandem, like an elliptical in a gym. It was a method that is anathema to any driver's education teacher, but which my father, also short of leg, mastered effectively. Bonnie had moved her seat so far forward that her breasts were rubbing along the middle of the steering wheel, which she spun erratically to pass any car that was in her way. Her magnified eyes peered intently over the top of the steering wheel and did not blink as they studied the road before them. She looked like the cartoon character Mr. Magoo and drove with the same faculty. Numerous cabs flicked us their two-fingered salute as she flew by. Finally, our British navigator politely pointed out that the entrance to the M25 was 500 feet ahead, and Bonnie accelerated her approach, edging out a Mini Cooper that I did not notice until I heard its tinny horn when we were almost on top of it. Not yet acclimated to driving on the wrong side of the road, I propped my feet on the beautiful leather console and reclined my seat to provide whatever protection I could from an impact I knew was only one wrong move away. But it never came. To this day, I'm not sure which of us sacrificed one of our 9 lives making that trip. "I hate driving in London," Bonnie muttered, as she nuzzled the car into heavier traffic on the M25, which forced her to slow down. The high barrier on the middle aisle hid the oncoming traffic and reduced the sense that we were driving on the wrong side of the road. I could see the planes in the distance on final approach to Heathrow. "Look, there's Windsor Castle," she said, pointing off to the side. I saw by the digital images appearing in the left-hand corner of the rearview mirror that we were heading west. After a while, she worked her way across some lanes and exited onto the M3. I wondered where the Brits' fascination with the letter M came from. "Next stop, Salisbury," she announced, recovering her BBC accent. We drove in silence for a few miles past a couple of towns that both seemed to be upon the Thames, and I lost myself in the surrounding beauty as we proceeded farther and farther west. Bonnie did not seem to be in any hurry to break the silence, so I finally did. "So tell me about Nana's gift." "Well," she began, "I didn't go looking for it. It found me a few years back when my eyesight really started to decline. Bonnie was the only one of us who wore glasses as a child. Hell, I did not don my first pair of readers until I hit 50, and I blame my legal career for that." "What do you mean it found you?" I asked. "Just what I said. I was sipping some tea in my back garden one early spring in 2014, and the tiny finches I thought were inhabiting my English ivy landed on the table and, bold as you please, introduced themselves. The sprites? The same." She drove a few more moments in silence and then added, "They told me Bridie Burke sends her regards and said, 'Tag, you're it.'" I grinned, thinking about my eccentric old Nana, who used to regale us all with her stories of ghosts and fairies when we were children. She enthralled us with the tales of regularly spying on the wee folk during the twilight hours of dawn and dusk back in Ireland. She also could communicate with the dead. which made her a bit of a celebrity in Twem, where she often shared messages between the locals and those on the far side of the Vale. She said she was the best Cailleach in Western Ireland. She also told me shortly before she passed.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?